We are rolling. So in many, many ways, we are rolling. So thank you so much for being here. I think I know all of you, but in case, my name is Mike Kinman. I'm the rector here. My pronouns are he, him. It is good to have everybody here this afternoon. So thanks for being here. This is the second of what will be quarterly town hall meetings on the finances of the church. And this really is a chance for us to just kind of lay out where we are and the direction that we're heading in, but we also want to leave plenty of time for any questions or thoughts that you have. So we've got a program that we're going to run through that will be a lot of information. Hopefully it won't be too much like drinking from a fire hose. But then after that, let's just have a conversation, and it's a chance to answer any questions or to address any issues that you might have. God dwells in you. Let us pray. Holy and loving God, giver of all good gifts, thank you especially for the great gift you give us when you give us to each other in your church. We ask you to be present with us, and even more to have us be present to you. Be among us and have us be receptive to you as a spirit of justice, as a spirit of compassion, as a spirit of courage, as a spirit of joy. Thank you for the abundance that you have gifted us with, and continue to guide us as we use it to your glory and for the love and transformation and healing of the world. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. So you're going to be hearing from several people today. I am one of the minor ones. Want to just really quickly just lift up the work of our internal finance accountability team, which is called together by our senior associate rector, Sally Howard, which includes Sarah Nolan, our director of giving, development, and economic justice, Aaron Sacco-Pineda, who is our controller and drove all the way from San Diego to be with us today. Thank you very much. And also Tim Stratz, I want to lift up as our chair of our finance committee, and then our recently retired treasurer. So much of the work that you're going to see is also because of the labor of Karen Myers. So grateful for her. And of course, our wardens, Risa Worthy-Deemer and Kathy Kegg. So a lot of folks are working really, really hard, and if I've left anyone out, I apologize. But I'm going to just start off by turning us over to Aaron Sacco-Pineda, who has done nothing short of a miraculous job working with us for the past year and a half?
Almost two.
Almost 2 years. So can we give Aaron a good round of applause and a welcome?
Thank you. So I'm happy to be here today. I'm also happy because the bulk of the presentation is for Sarah. And so I'm going to just give you all an update on how we ended up in terms of the operating financials, income and expenses for 2023, because that's the time of year to circle back around. We shared in November where we were to date at that point, so now we can tell you where we ended up for the year. And then Sarah's going to give a giving update, which was requested back in November at the town hall then. So we'll dig into giving and the trends for the last 5 years or so, and where we think those trends are headed for All Saints. And then we'll circle back to a little bit more of the strategy and planning that's going on, and we'll probably, Sarah and I, Mike and Sally, maybe even Tim, will tag team some high points for you. So the 2023 financial results are the blue column on the right, and the good news is, for those of you who were here in November, I believe what I was presenting in November were the results through the first 3 quarters through September, and at that point we were showing a year-to-date $250,000 loss, and we ended the year with a $110,000 surplus. And that's really due to all the generosity of all of you in this community. The December giving at All Saints is incredibly high. I'm sure you all know from your experience of All Saints in December how busy the church is, and all of the services, and all of the people who maybe you only see in December and at Easter. I refer to those folks as Creasters, the Christmas Easter Christians, which is just fine in the Episcopal Church. So we appreciate those folks, and at All Saints, at all Episcopal churches and all churches, surely we see a tick up in giving in December, but it's extraordinary here. And it makes budgeting a little bit hard. So all of last year, we were really looking at the pledge income specifically in Plate 2 and kind of wringing our hands a bit about whether or not we were going to hit these budget numbers. And in all cases, we exceeded them, except for that we had planned to have filming income, but because of the industry strikes for the writers and artists, we didn't have any filming income last year. So that's one of the things that we can dually celebrate, that all of the generosity of all of you in this community, as well as the good work of the staff and the ministry leaders to control expenses, meant that we were able to meet the year with end the year with a surplus, even though there was a significant component of income that didn't come to pass. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Sarah, and she'll talk more about the giving that has transpired in recent years, as well as what we're seeing in the future.
Thank you. And yes, affirming what Erin said, everyone's generosity here has been extraordinary and continues to be. I'm going to be sharing kind of high level. We can really get into the weeds and do a deep dive in a lot of these areas. So most of what I'll be sharing is a high level look at our 2023 giving, our anticipated 2024 giving, and other ways that people express their generosity here at All Saints. So to do a 2023 pledge review, last year we had 568 households pledge about $2.7 million. And one of the things that I've learned while I'm here at All Saints is that we're still we're still navigating how we categorize our giving. And so what ended up actually happening on our books was that we had about 779 households who gave around $2.9 million. And so that includes people who are regular, consistent givers that have been previously categorized as pledgers over time that are connected to people who submit a pledge card. So those are two different activities, giving regularly and then submitting your pledge card. It's the same benefit, but two different ways we track that. But you'll see that we have when we put the two together, we have a higher number of households participating. The median pledge, for those of you who find this helpful, I think a lot of people find this helpful to understand, where you might fit in the system. And the median, I'll just add, is not the average. So it takes out the big outliers, right? It takes out the largest gift and the smallest gift, and it's really that true median of participation, which is about $2,000. And median contribution, once we add all of that up, is about $1,300. So one thing that was really great, we had $2,880,000 budgeted for 2023, and actually, again, saw a higher increase in pledge giving. And some of that is connected to people giving more than what they pledged, which is a really common practice here at All Saints, which is incredible. And I think one of the themes we'll see is just incredible generosity that continues to happen in this community on all levels. So I want to turn now to talk about 2024, and this is this year. And why we pledge, many of you know, is the reason we pledge and have people make commitments in the fall before the budget year is to help us really begin to plan and anticipate what giving will look like. And so this number here is one of the numbers that we're working with, while also taking into account other anticipated gifts. Right now, our current amount of pledges that have been submitted, the cards, the online forms that have been submitted, is $2,430,582. We had set a goal for 3 million, and so we are about 81% towards our goal, and are continuing to work towards meeting that goal. Of those who have given, there are 474 households with a median pledge of 2,280, which is very similar to last year. What I want to also point out is the amount of increase, new pledgers, decreases, and still outstanding giving. Increase, we have 157 households who are giving above, who have increased their contribution increases combined, bring us to about $169,000 in increased giving this year. We have 97 households who are new, never pledged before, or returning, and that means that they had not pledged in previous years, in one previous year or more, and have returned and have started pledging again. And that's 97 households for almost $200,000 in new pledge dollars that we did not have last year. The amount of decreases is 58 households for a total of $180,000, and that is, of all the decreases combined, totals that. And then of all the folks who had made a pledge, a paper pledge last year, who have not yet pledged, that's 195 households for about $500,000. And those are the households that we are really going to be focusing on, making phone calls. I have a few of you in this room making phone calls, following up. Several of these folks actually give regularly, but they just have not submitted a pledge. And one of the things that we need to do is follow up with them and make sure they submit the pledge, or let us know if we can anticipate their giving to continue as it is. I will also share, which, just to give some context, in 2022, in January, we had about 530 households pledging for about 2.5 million, and we ended up hitting about 2.9 again in 2022. Last year, as of January, we had about 500 households pledging for a little bit under, it was probably closer to 2.2 at this time. And so we are currently ahead of where we were this time last year, but not where we were in 2022. And so looking at both of those numbers, that we're in a certain range, but definitely recognizing that we really need to do the work of calling and following up with folks. And looking at the expectation of new people coming and making gifts and pledges, and folks who have been here for a while and who have not pledged, participating as pledging members. Yes?
What is the date of that slide?
Oh, thank you. That's a great point. The date of that slide was Friday. Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. One of the things that we discovered in how we keep our records.
Sarah, can you, because people are going to be watching this later recorded, can you repeat what he said, because he didn't have a mic? Thanks.
Thank you. And I am also trying to see how to get my
He was asking about the date on that.
Yeah, so the question was, how can we compare giving year to year and pledging year to year, specifically when pledges come in, where are we at compared to previous years? And we are going to be able to do that, but one of the things that we learned in our database was that all pledges were entered at the same date. And so it actually wasn't tracking. There was a spreadsheet that was tracking different dates, but our database, which is what I'm using now because I don't have the spreadsheet, all the dates show pretty much November 11th of the previous year. And so we have changed that. So now we can track week to week what we're looking at. And where I'm getting those other numbers is basically emails that I've come across that had like the real numbers. And I think, did that answer your question? But yes. Going forward, we get this late in March, we can't really compare to last year Correct. Going forward, we'll have much specific data. I will say we would prefer to be farther ahead right now, I will say that. And I think compared to previous years, you were probably looking at more of an 80% amount in December. That's based on kind of historical, what folks have told me that we have looked at before. And I know there are other folks in this room who might actually be able to give more specific answers to that. And when we do more questions and answers, we can talk more about that. I am, trying to figure out how to go back. Oh, thank you. Thank you. Erin's a pro at PowerPoint presentations. Okay. So I also want to talk about non-pledge giving. And this is comparing 2023 non-pledge giving versus 2022 non-pledge giving. Non-pledge giving includes open plate, which is right now includes giving that happens in services. Any checks that come in that are not connected to a pledge, bank drafts, and any sort of giving that is not online or is not pledge falls under open plate. Online giving is all giving that happens that is not connected to a pledge that has been made. Special gifts are usually one-time gifts or a couple of one-time gifts that exceed $5,000 that are included and that are not part of a pledge payment. And then Christmas, Easter, and flowers. In 2023, we had $120,000 in open plate versus 2022, which was $153,000. And you can also see online this year was $135,000. 2022 was $181,000. And I'm going to stop here to make one clarifying comment that some of this is connected again to how we were categorizing different things. We've moved some of these towards realizing that what was categorized in 2022 was actually pledged giving that did not get captured. And so we, in 2023, put that in the correct category.
Sarah, because I struggle with this, can you clarify what online means, that it's not, these are the people who are only online, it's online as donating?
Correct. Yeah, thank you. So Blaine asked, can I clarify what online giving is? Online giving is anyone who uses one of our online platforms, and we have two. One of them is called Tithely, and the other one is called Shelby Next. And these are the ways that people are able to give virtually. So it's any gift that we receive that is not dedicated to a pledge that was received virtually. And this includes people who give during the service through their phone, goes into online giving if it is not connected to a pledge. It is not connected necessarily to people who are watching online, though several of them give online. However, I also say people who watch online also give by bank drafts. Also, they give in many ways as well. Special gifts was really our outlier this year, and you will see the difference that in 2022 we had about $55,000 in special giving. This year, $192,000 in special gifts. And this goes back to what Erin said about that real bump that we saw in December and the end of the year giving. A lot of gifts of gratitude and support were given, and it just exceeded several years of special giving, which we are really excited to see that. And then Christmas and Easter and flowers are about the same year to year. So now I want to show you a giving comparison, and I'm going to make a distinction. So you'll see, and there's going to come a point where we don't talk about it this way, where there are people who pledged, and then the actual amount of contributions that were categorized as pledged giving. There's going to, and I apologize that it's not always clear, but this is just making sure that we see the real numbers. So when people who actually turned in cards or their pledges were recorded in our database is the first column. But then the amount that was given and categorized as pledge income or as regular giving, expected giving, is in the second column. And what I will point out is that we are definitely seeing a decrease. You can see that going down. And the work that we are doing is trying to understand why, right? And we are looking at the different pieces of, things that are happening on a national cultural level, things that are happening in the city of Pasadena, in this region, but things are also happening here and how that impacts giving. One of the great things that we know that we are seeing, though, is that we definitely have more giving participation than often shows up in the pledge numbers. And what I actually don't know, I've never asked this, if All Saints has previously tracked, do you have pledge participation goals? Have we done that in the past? Like number of people participating? Okay. So I guess realizing as we meet, we're kind of working with a couple different, we're looking at a couple of different ways that we just look at giving, I guess. And one of the work that we're working on is trying to make that clear for all of us to know how we're able to meet these goals and also understand what the drop-off is, and some of that I will talk about in the next slide. Or I'll talk it. Yeah.
Can you explain again the difference between those two columns, between pledge and giving as pledge?
Yeah, and this may be getting into the weeds. So I was a farmer. I was a farmer before, and so I like weeds. But I'm recognizing that it is not always, a weed is only as useful as you need it to be. And if we all love dandelions, right? And so the pledge column is the amount. So when someone submits a pledge, it gets recorded in our database as a pledge. That is the first column. The second column is the numbers that we actually see that get used in our budget and in our and in how we track, when we track all contributions that have been categorized in our database under that fund. So a part of it is a back-end fund categorization. So probably going forward, we'll get rid of we will focus more on what is the major contribution. And I guess, and Gloria might be able to speak to this more, and Terry, that we look at regular anticipated giving as well as pledges that were actually made, and those are combined as we think about how we budget. Because the second column is the actual contributions we receive. That's what I needed to say. The second column is the actual contributions we received and the number of people who participate in the pledged category. And because I know there's some questions, and there's a mic, and I want to think if I should pause here for some, let's talk about.
Do we want to just have you finish at least your section of this, and then maybe we stop there and see if there's any questions for you?
Yes, we're going to do
Okay.
that. Yeah, thank you. This is a 5-year non-pledge giving comparison, and what you can see there is kind of stable about 2017, 2018. You really, other than special gifts during COVID, you see a real drop off in online giving, in plate giving, in-person giving. Of course, part of that was connected to not being in church together. Online giving is beginning to trend up. You see a real drop in special gift giving, and then we're also seeing it's starting to bump up again. We're starting to increase. And our work right now is to get all of these lines to slowly start moving back up. And I want to point out, the online mailed-in giving, it really peaked in 2021, started to come down, and part of that was connected, and this is an example, to an issue in our online giving system that stopped receiving gifts and the time it took to get people back onto the system. And so that should begin to go up, and that is going to be an area that we work on. But a lot of the things that we see too are connected to needing to transition systems, get up to date with more recent technology, and making it easier for people to participate in giving and generosity. Other income streams, as Erin mentioned earlier when she was talking about our not getting some of the income we are anticipating. Other income streams we look at is facility use, parking, filming income. We are working to revamp rental contracts, expand use with new spaces, getting our parking income, which we just recently had our parking income exceed expectations in the last month. And this is parking income is connected to the parking lot that is on the north side of the building that we lease to a parking management company. And then getting filming to ramp back up is a big piece of that. The Vestry and others have expressed interest in considering, this was last summer, considering grants and community partnerships as a way of developing existing and future programming and sources of potential income. And so that is something that we are keeping an eye on responsibly as a thing to do. And then this is where I'll close my section and we can have some conversation about giving. But supporting generosity at All Saints, this is really what we're talking about here. There's very specific practical things that we want to do, including short and long range planning. One of those is our giving committee working on strategic and sustaining actions, such as how are we being strategic in how we engage annual fund giving, which is our pledge giving, what kind of language are we using, is it connecting, also looking at special gifts, special giving, how we do that, planned giving and collective campaigns, kind of like grassroots opportunities to get more people involved in how they participate in financial generosity at All Saints. Similarly, we are working on strengthening processes for charitable giving at All Saints and addressing financial needs for long-term maintenance of campus resources. And these are things to kind of, we are keeping in mind both in the short range and looking ahead so that we are creating the opportunity for, the people who are part of this church community to have a strong financial foundation going forward. Giving in gratitude, supporting new giving, and inviting deeper connection and participation for those who have been giving. Making it practically easier for people to give and for us to give thanks and respond. And that includes better online platforms for giving, church app, and membership database, which may seem unimportant, but is critical in this work today, having ease of use for both the end user and the back end user to be able to make those connections and to follow up timely. Especially given just capacity of staffing and wanting to make sure that we are using people's time and resources well. And we are looking at a database transition this summer, in fact, and so you will hear more about that. And finally, storytelling and connection, because why we do this is the big question. Why we give. People give because it's a spiritual practice. They give for what matters to them. They give because there's a mutuality. There's something that we give and get from one another in the best sense of the relationship. And then the question is, why do we give to All Saints? And that being something that is invitational, about storytelling, about impact, and about belonging, and making sure that we are elevating those messages and creating the ways for those connections to happen, while then our team on the back end is making it easier for people to know where they can plug in and how they can be supported in their generosity.
So
Okay.
we're going to go to questions in just a second, but I want to just say thank you. So, first of all, it's hard to believe you've only been here 9 months. I mean, it is just amazing. So can we first I want to thank Sarah for just the amazing work that you are doing, just helping us just get to this point, and just thank you, and we're so glad you're here. And I also want to call out Marilyn Kaufman, because Marilyn has done so much just amazing work in the giving area and as a volunteer. And so thank you to Marilyn. So just want to pause here. Are there questions for Sarah or on anything that you've seen so far? And then we have just some final stuff to get to. Hold on, I'm going to be over here and then up to David. And please say your name.
My name is Mark. So David's next. So we're in the Bible. Anyways, my question is this. When I see the 2019 figures of how many households have support, and then we're going down to Now we're down to 474 in that first column. I didn't get the numbers on the second one. That tells me like half the households, almost half of them have left. And my question is, and I think these are where the calls really matter. Not just, are you going to make a pledge? Maybe 5 to 10 questions. Can I ask you something? Why are you no longer pledging? Oh, you moved to Canada, you know? Okay, we can write that down. Oh, it's because you're not being fed in this particular area of, you know, something, children's ministries you felt were lacking, or maybe just a theological issues. But to find out what is happening. Now, of course, some of those are people passing away, you know, so that's going to be always an issue. But it seems to me like we need to do more surveys and focus groups of why so many households have left All Saints, because then we can get to the roots of the problem and put budget money towards those problem areas. And so I was wondering, do we have any surveys to people or focus groups set up? And if we don't, why not?
I'm going to let Mike speak to that specifically, but I will add to one other component is that people are still here and they also haven't been connected with to participate in giving as well. So that's one piece of the follow-up that I will specifically be working on.
Right. Yeah, no, and thank you. It's an excellent question. And I want to shout out, I see Jerry Puhara sitting right there. Jerry Puhara and Lorna Miller and a really wonderful group they've done sort of a first round, but will continue reaching out to people who are no longer giving, who are no longer pledging. And sat down, I think the average length of those conversations was an hour, was 2 hours. So these were really in-depth conversations. They gave a report to the vestry. We're looking at some of the things that they've said, and we're continuing to reach out to people. And so absolutely, we want to have that data, and that will be part of, also part of the calls that are made. I also do want to, another piece of that is you talk about people, so people who have died, that's a harder call to make. That's, but also, so many people who have died have remembered All Saints in their estate planning, and that has been just transformational. And so that's something that I would really encourage everyone to do. If you haven't, if you're making your estate plans, please remember All Saints Church in your estate planning. And then the other thing is we've had some really amazing parishioners who have moved out of Southern California who continue to give regularly and give very generously. And so, fortunately, just leaving the area doesn't necessarily mean losing that. But no, excellent question. And we are working on that, and we're continuing to work on that. There's more that we can do. So thank you for raising that. I'm going to go up here to David.
Just a small point, David Randall, just a small point of clarification. When you're tracking amount contributed versus amount pledged for each of the members that are pledging members, are you including receipts in all categories as part of that? If not, why not? Because that would reflect what a member has indicated as their intention to give, and while they may do it in more than one stream, it would seem like it would be logical to recognize all contributions by that pledger as part of that donation.
Great question, and I would just say what we are doing is working on clarifying how we reflect giving, and that's why it's so important to look at giving as not just pledges, but the overall picture, because it's how income comes into the church, whether it's through online giving, whether it's through special gifts, because there are people who, pledge and then at the end of the year do a special gift, right? And making those distinct. Of course, the person still gets credit for both of those, but how we track that is different because it helps us think about it differently. But the work that we're doing is, and we just actually worked with Marilyn and our team around getting a little bit more clear about what is a plate gift, right? And what is other offering? And that's something that we're hoping to streamline so that as we report to you all, it is clear and it does reflect giving intentions. Thank you. Yeah, and we'll take that into account so that we are. That's to your. The point is, are we reflecting how parishioners who are pledging parishioners are giving as a whole, and not just towards their pledge?
So, the follow-up comment was just reflecting, as I understand it, David, pledge against all types of giving that a parishioner might make, what their pledge was compared to all of their giving. So what I would say from my experience is that members are not consistent about when you're making the intention, the pledge, and making that pledge, whether that is meant to just be your operating contribution, or if a member means for that to be their overall commitment to All Saints. That's not consistent person to person. So some folks will make an operating pledge, and that is helpful for folks to understand, is that we have lots of ministries actually that are funded outside of the operating budget. So if we apply, it's important that we are able to make sure that we understand what is a pledge payment or what is intended as operating support versus support of something else. So that can be a case where if folks elect to indicate in their pledge their overall commitment to All Saints for the year, in your giving statement, then you might see that it looks like you were underpaid on your quote pledge, but we can still see and reflect your overall engagement, and absolutely do take that into account.
My name is Marshall Rutter. I'm thrilled that we had a surplus last year, and that's a wonderful thing to have in any church in this day when only about 20% of Americans identify themselves as affiliated with a church. And that's been going down, and I think it's going to continue going down. And it's unrealistic to think that we can increase the pledges beyond what they have been in the last 3 or 4 years. But I think the elephant in the room is the fact that we balanced the budget last year with $677,000 of money from the government that's not going to be coming in next year. Mm-hmm. And I find it impossible to believe that we can find other money to equal that amount in addition to getting the pledges up to what they have been.
Thank you. And that will be something we'll touch on briefly in an upcoming slide. I want to share just real quickly, and I also want to be mindful of time. There was a story in the Episcopal News Service, I don't know how many of you follow that, about a church in Sarasota, Florida, where one of the parishioners gave one of the single largest gifts towards operating budget that is known within the Episcopal Church that we know of, about $500,000. This was just about a month ago. It got news coverage, and it was for the purpose of invigorating the church and taking it, looking forward and saying, we need this investment to grow. And I think, and they're growing. And I will say, I did look up like the percentage of growth of population in Sarasota, Florida. Sarasota is also growing. But it was really powerful. I mean, if you get a chance to look that story up, it was a really powerful story about generosity and how it connects to participation and in many ways, and involvement. And I think it is possible. And we also need to be prudent and mindful, and are talking about the elephant in the room. We can turn it into another animal now, to identify what are the challenges we are facing and being honest about that. And that is the work that this group is doing, along with the vestry and the finance committee and the economic sustainability task force, and others.
Yeah. So we can put a pin in that. Is there any more about giving? I'm going to go to Monique over here. I'm telling you to say your names, but I'm saying all your names first. So.
Thank you. My name is Monique. I appreciate Marshall's point because that's actually absolutely true. The trend is going down, and the structure of what people are needing from churches are changing, and we need to be mindful of that and be the church for the need of that people have right now. My question, though, and this may come up later, is about endowment. We've never had a strong endowment as a church, and there are so many things, whether it's music and other programming, that could be offset by a strong endowment. What are we doing in those areas, or how is our endowment? Do we have one? Anything on that?
Yeah, I'm going to speak briefly to the third point, address financial need for long-term maintenance of campus resources. I honestly think that's one of the most vital gifts we could give to our future selves is investing in some sort of endowment and some potential, like really building a fund to provide for the maintenance and longevity of this campus so that those resources aren't taken from general operating or from bequests even, unless that bequest is specific to go towards the maintenance of the building. And that is something that this church has not had. And I think that could be something we really need to have a serious conversation about. How do we do that going forward so that, you know, people 10 years from now are not looking at the same challenges that we have been facing since like 2014 and maybe even before then, based on the things that I've seen. This is not a new thing, to your point. And I don't know, if Mike, if you want to speak anything.
Yeah, actually, I was wondering if this might be a good time for, first of all, Aaron, to sort of talk about the difference between endowment and quasi-endowment, and kind of where we are and what's happened in sort of the last year with the work on the Enriquez house.
You're going to let me geek out on fund accounting?
Oh,
Woo!
yeah, I
Okay,
am. I was
so-
just going to give you a big old softball to hit there.
Right. So, and maybe this will be, this is, I think, a bigger group today than we had in November. And I don't know if we said, we're going to do a future one just on endowments and long-term maintenance planning if we get bigger or smaller amounts, maybe more. Yep. So there are 4 pieces of the endowment that exist for All Saints right now. And you're absolutely right. The true endowment, meaning the principle of original gifts that are for general operating but are meant to be maintained in perpetuity, never spent, and just spending from the earnings on those gifts, is only about $800,000. So we received a $1 million gift in the last couple of years, and that is a new portion of the true endowment that has some specific restrictions on it. We also received in the last couple of years about $120,000 that was a true endowment gift for healing. So put those 3 together, and that's about $2 million is the true endowment balance.
And I want to shout out the names Adelaide Hickson and Margaret Siedenquist, who were the 2 givers of those.
The donors,
gifts.
yeah.
So thank you.
And then we have a 4th piece of the endowment that's called the quasi-endowment. And at Finance Committee, we've talked about renaming it because, as my understanding here and elsewhere, it's a confusing name. But the reason we use the term quasi-endowment is meant to distinguish that portion of your endowment from what I just referred to as the true or the perpetually restricted balance. A quasi-endowment is what was designated internally as endowment, either by policy or by vestry. And the reason it's indicated as quasi, as not really endowment, is because the vestry does not have the power to restrict the behavior of a future vestry. So even if a vestry said, we want this money to be endowed, a future vestry can undo that designation. And that's true for endowed funds as well as other kinds of funds.
So that's helpful. And also to put that in perspective, in 2019, the Episcopal Church came out with really a phenomenal kind of dashboard that you can use to look at all the data that comes in from parochial reports, which is this crazy long document we have to fill out every year. But I did a search, and I said, okay, I want to look at how many churches have the budget and the average Sunday attendance of that's All Saints, in our neighborhood or above. We're one of the largest, we're the largest Episcopal church on the West Coast. And I found 16 churches in the Episcopal Church that were in sort of the neighborhood of our profile. And we were the only one that didn't have at least $10 million in endowment. And you've heard that we have considerably less than that. And so that's just part of the reality. And then you add to that, which is part of why Sarah said, address financial need for long-term maintenance of campus resources, and his eyes fall on Lonnie Shield, who has been doing amazing work trying to do this, which is we have $11 million in deferred maintenance on these buildings before you even talk about new buildings. And so this is a challenge for us. It's one we're up to. We're up to this challenge. We can do this. And this is kind of where we are. We got some bills coming due. So, and again, I really encourage you, in addition to your pledge giving, which is so important, and I think almost everyone in here has pledged, please, please remember the church in your estate planning. This is one of these things where you can make a huge difference, not just now, but you can make a huge difference for this church for generations to come. And so please, like Robin and I are doing that in our estate planning. If you need someone to help you out with that, Gloria Pitzer right over here is just a wonderful, wonderful person. Jim White, are you volunteering to help people out with that, Jim? I have a question. Okay, great. Yeah. It's like, okay, enough talking, Kenman. Here you go. Here you go. Jim White.
I have remembered the church in my estate plan, but I haven't designated what should happen with that money. So if I don't do that, what will happen to it?
You want to talk about the gift policy?
Sure. So we have a bequest policy, and again, like I said before, it's a policy of vestry, right? It's a church policy that could be shifted in the future, but currently the policy says any undesignated bequests go into the quasi-endowment. Unless they are less than 25,000.
Less than 25, yes.
And then there's a committee that will speak to where they should go. So the bulk of bequests, the bulk in numbers, because we do get quite a few small ones, go to the committee for decision and may end up supporting operations, but the large ones go into quasi-endowment. And due to how substantial the amount of bequests have been over the last 5 or so years, that has been a major source of funding for a lot of the construction work that you all have been experiencing here.
Right, and just to give another shout out, and I'll go over to Blaine over here. Many of you, I hope, remember Joe Drummond. And Joe, I'm getting teary. Every Sunday I was here at 7:30 before COVID. Joe was the verger there, and Joe was an amazing, just dear, faithful parishioner. And when she died, she left $1 million to All Saints Church, not for endowment, but specifically for the upkeep of the windows and the AV system in the church. And so that's another thing that you can do. You can designate a gift to say, I want it used in this area that you care about. But then the whole thing can be spent down. An endowment, you can only use the interest of, and it can't drop below the original corpus. And so that's an example of someone who just said, I want to make sure this space stays, beautiful and vibrant. And so, Joe, you're out there somewhere. God love you. We love you and miss you every day, and thank you for your gift. So again, you can make a gift and just say, I'm going to leave that to the leadership of the church to discern where that needs to be best used. Or if there's something that you specifically have a passion for, you can say, hey, I want it in these areas. And we get wonderful gifts of all types, and they're all so deeply meaningful. And if you're out there thinking, well, I'm not going to have much of an estate, I hardly have anything to give, it's not even about that. We get bequests of $500, and they're deeply meaningful because it shows the love that someone has for this community. So don't just think of I don't have much money, I can't get, that's not what that's about. It's about saying, I want to give something of what God has gifted me during this lifetime so that this community can continue to grow and thrive.
I want to just add while you're walking over there, Mike. In my kind of work the last couple of years, we're cleaning up the financials. One of the things I found out was that there was about $10,000 given in the 30s or 40s, 1930s or 40s, for radio ministry, thankfully, or seminarian support. So we do keep track of that in the financials.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that I'm clear, and maybe other people will be clear as well. So if we leave money to the church and don't specify what it's for, if it's at the moment, if it's over 25,000, it goes into quasi, which I think of as a savings account that we can spend if we choose to do so with appropriate approval. If it's under, it just goes into general operating. If
it's under, it goes to a committee to decide.
Giving committee sides, okay. If I want to specify a particular purpose, then it is tracked and used for that particular purpose.
Right.
And if I want it to go into the endowment, I say the magic words, this is for the endowment.
Right.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. I want to finish. Aaron, I'm going to turn it over to you. You're going to have a chance, Pat and everyone else. But I want us to finish up the presentation, and then we can just go into questions about anything, because I feel like we're sort of moving into different areas anyway. So, Aaron, you want to finish us off? I mean,
Yeah.
not finish us off, but you want to finish the presentation.
Yeah, absolutely. So just some last bullet points. Heading into 2024, we're in 2024, thankfully still in the first quarter. We would have liked to have brought you an adopted budget today to share with you. We aren't there yet, is what I will admit. We've been working hard with the Finance Committee and the vestry, and really, I think collectively learning a lot about what the needs of the current operating model and ministries are. And so there's work being done. The challenge has already been stated today, is that we're dealing with a deficit budget. So the most I really want to let you all know today about the 2024 budget is that right now we're projecting between a $300,000 and $500,000 budget deficit, meaning income will be about that much less than projected expenses. We are looking at both how to generate more income as well as how to control expenses or reduce expenses. And we are also working with Economic Sustainability and Finance Committee to develop a 3-year or longer plan to cure the structural deficit. So one of the things that we've been able to work with kind of in the restructuring that I've mostly worked on in the last year is to really identify what we have in operating reserves, kind of our rainy day savings, as it were. And we're starting 2024 with just over $1 million. So you can see if we're looking at annual deficits of close to 500, that goes away pretty quick. So that's kind of the challenge that we're facing, and there's a really amazing group of people who are facing it together. The other thing I wanted to share just briefly, and I'm sure there's going to be forums on it in the future, is the collaborative organizational model. And I believe, Sally, was there a forum for the community back in like 2020 or 2019? Yeah, so some things got put on pause in terms of organizational structure and how we do our work during COVID. And so now that we're moved out of COVID, we're sort of restarting and engaging widely the staff and ministry leaders on the collaborative model. And so there's a renewed focus on the welcoming ministries and the responsiveness of staff to the community across all folks on the staff, as well as the staff and vestry are both engaging in a project around intentional culture. And then lastly, and this is part of the challenge of this year's budget and developing a 3-year plan, is that we really want to have the feedback of all of the ministry leaders and staff who are doing direct ministry, right? It's important that finance is not leading, that finance is reporting and giving appropriate color to the work, to the programs and ministries. So we're engaging staff and volunteer leadership in the strategic planning process in the way that it supports their particular areas. And so that's work ahead here in the first couple of quarters of this year. Do you want to speak to the centennial?
Do you-
Nobody?
Like Sarah's, I think that was yours.
I live in San Diego, guys. Sorry.
Shameless plug from the Centennial Committee staff person. Just wanting to remind people that we are recognizing our centennial of the building. And I think this goes back to what we were talking about long-term maintenance and the care and the life that has been infused in this community. And so these were just a few dates to keep an eye on before we move into questions and answers, or questions and conversations. So in March, the Philadelphia 11, we're celebrating the women's ordination. There are going to be a documentary and reception. And then please save the date for September 15th for our big homecoming commemoration and centennial celebration, holding the both and right now as we navigate all the different moving pieces in this place that is so loved.
Thank you very much. Well, first of all, can we just say thank you to Aaron and Sarah and everyone who's been working on these things, and just want to open it up. Yeah, Pat, I told you I'd go to you first, so here you go.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. I'm glad you mentioned the centennial year because I think it's an unusual. It's once every 100 years that this place gets celebrated for being what it is, a great building that's facilitated a lot of things. So it's struck me, we're members of an HOA in Pasadena, and we have what is called a reserve fund, which I'm sure Aaron knows a lot about, and I'm not sure other churches have them, and I'm not sure how our budget reflects the existence of something like that, but we have a lot of costs that we know are gonna come up someday. There's a water pump, there's a roof, there's painting, and you know the costs of those, and you can predict them. And in fact, the state requires HOAs to have that as part of their bylaws. I was on a interesting committee with Phil Necker and Mark Edwards just a few years back before COVID. And Mark came up with this really great analysis of here's all the things that haven't been done to keep our building up, and here's what we're going to need. And it was an awesome number. I think it was over $2 million. At that time, it'd be 3 now at least. And we've spent some of that money down in the roof up here and so forth, but I don't know that we have what I would call a capital improvements part of our budget. I'm not familiar with it enough, but we put money in regularly to anticipate this, and we don't know, it's not gonna be every year, year over year, it's gonna be sometime in the next 5 years that this is going to have to happen and it's going to cost something. So I guess my point would be out of looking at this stuff is that our centennial year would be a great time for the vestry to consider structuring our budget in such a way that we have that anticipated. And it would hurt this year. It really would hurt, I can tell, because you're not even talking about that in operating. But I just would appeal to you to use this year to try to think that through more deeply, because if it isn't caught now, I don't know if we're ever going to catch it. But if you put it in, let's say it's a 10-year capital plan, you've got a tenth of that $2 million to pay up, and you're not going to have a campaign for that, but you're going to have something that in the budget we know we're going to need it 5 years out, 10 years out, and you say that, and it's transparent.
Yeah, so I don't know how you knew I did property management for HOAs before I became a CPA, but somehow you did. So reserve studies, for anyone who does live in a condo association or a HOA type organization, you see those annual reserve studies. So those are really great documents, and I have been wanting to get kind of over the operating fund work so that we can focus on some of this tracking, and the number I'm looking for is the one you're speaking to, which is called the annual funding requirement. So what is our annual funding requirement that needs to be in our operating budget? And you're right that it is not currently. The one thing I would also tell you, and this might be news on how you read your HOA's reserve study, is the annual funding requirement assumes you are already fully funded. So there is also the accumulated funding requirement, meaning how much should your fund balance be? And so if we're not at that accumulated funding requirement, then our annual funding should be higher than the annual funding requirement. to make that up. The last thing I'll say about the comparison is that HOAs by California Civil Code are generally only allowed to maintain reserves for the purposes of the HOA's requirements, like the long-term maintenance, and are supposed to give excess funds back otherwise to their members. So y'all might not have known that, but look hard at your HOA financials because they may owe you money.
So Mike, might be a question for you. You said that there are about 16 churches that have $10 million endowments or something. Well, my question is, I know that we have a requirement to give a percentage back to the Episcopal Church, to the diocese, and that's usually out of our operating. Do they have a requirement for churches that reach a certain threshold of endowment to give back to them?
So just to repeat, and then I think you can actually answer how the pledge is done in different dioceses. I know that that's based on your. So to answer your question, and I'm going to look at you because if I get it wrong, you're going to tell me. Aaron works with churches all over the country. And so, part of why we're just so blessed to have you is you're not only great at what you do, you give us a great perspective from other churches. And so what the pledge, in this diocese, we've gone to what's called a mandatory assessment. And this is starting this year, that the diocese is asking that every congregation give 12% of its net operating income. And then they have a formula of how you figure that out. And that formula does include income that you get from your endowments. So, so what we're doing with that, we write by far the single largest check to the diocese every year. And it's important that we do, because there are so many areas of our diocese that cannot economically sustain needed transformational ministry on their own. The money is just not there in those communities. And they depend on communities like Pasadena that do have the wealth in them to contribute so that the church can be present in all these areas. So what we have said is 12% for us is just, it's too much for us to do right now. But we've made a commitment to say, look, we're going to do 10% this year and 11% next year and 12% the year after that. And we're working with the diocese on that. And it's just super important. And so what I will say, I'll repeat the statistic I gave before, which was I found 16 churches, and this was in 2019, that were in our neighborhood in terms of average Sunday attendance and size of budget or above. I mean, many of them are greater. And we were the only one that did not have at least $10 million in endowment. Many of them have much more. Like, think about Trinity Wall Street. Obviously, like they were at one point the largest real estate holder in Manhattan. They've got a lot more. The cathedral in Cincinnati that has Procter & Gamble money. The dean's discretionary fund is the income from a $60 million endowment, just from the dean's discretionary fund. So there is like huge pieces of wealth out there, but yeah, we're the only one that doesn't have at least 10 million in that. So
I'm going to add to your sentence, Mike. Yeah. We, yes, the income from endowment is part of that calculation, but only as we pull it into the operating, to use it for operations. So as the market increases and decreases and we're having, unrealized earnings, that isn't part of the calculation, only when we draw it into the operating budget.
Hi, my name is Terry, and I'm a member of the Finance Committee, I'm happy to say. And I want to go back, Aaron, if you'll forgive me for this, to when you were talking about fiscal 24 and the fact that the budget isn't yet completely done. And your slide showed us about a roughly $500,000 or so deficit, and you made a comment about using money from operating reserves that would make it go away. I feel it's important to stress that the decision has not been made to do that. I think we all need to understand that it's not really that simple necessarily. It could be, but the decision hasn't been made, and it just felt like we needed to just stress that for a second, if I may. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Terry. And in case what I was trying to say wasn't clear, so I believe, and I'm going to toot my own horn here for a second. I believe that I pulled your rainy day savings / operating reserve balance out of your financial for the first time last year, meaning the first time ever, potentially, definitely in the last 20 years of accounting, meaning that previously there was a line item in the financials that said, oh, you have $20 million, so you're fine. But most of that is in your fixed assets value. So to pull the equity and fixed assets that reported on the financials out of that number to really see what do we have cash in bank that can be used to cover a deficit or to add to other ministries, and I'm sort of referring to it as the rainy day savings, that isn't otherwise restricted or designated. Another word for it would be retained earnings. So in terms of the church's operations, those of you in business will be familiar with the term retained earnings. It's only about $1 million. So and Terry is making a very good point. The decision has not been made about how much of a deficit will be adopted in this year's budget. And the point I was trying to make is that we don't have a lot of runway to carry deficits.
Hi, my name is Bonnie Rice, and these are a couple, actually 3 really little detailed questions. First, is the PowerPoint going to be available to us, and how?
Yeah, we're also filming this session, and so the recording and the PowerPoint will be available online.
Great, thank you. And then at the end of the first town hall, and Tony, I'm looking at you, I'd asked about the strategic direction that I understood then was being used by Vestry to make budget decisions this year. Is that yet available to us? Well, there's apparently strategic direction that came out of that strategic planning group. And in November, it was noted that the vestry was using that for decision making, but I didn't think it had been posted or published anywhere.
Let me get you. Yeah, there was a committee that I chaired, along with help very much from Terry, called the Strategic Directions Committee. And what that came up with is 3 what we call North Star goals for the church going forward. And if I'm not mistaken, the vestry, in fact, adopted those three goals. So I don't frankly know if they've been published or not. They should be, because they have been adopted by vestry, but they are out there. And they are sort of high-level goals for the church to try to attain over a period of time. I would not say that I understand that the vestry is using those now in their considerations for budget, and I certainly know that we're not considering those. I'm on the finance committee in terms of budgeting. There is further work to be done to develop a strategic plan, which has more to do with both finance and operations, what we would actually do to try to achieve those North Star goals. But that's sort of a separate activity than the actual budgeting conversation, at least at this point. It should roll together going forward, where your strategic goals and your planning towards them is the way in which you begin to determine how you actually spend money, but we're not there yet. But I will say, though, that there's another task force that we've been talking about here that you should also know about, which is the Sustainable Development Task Force, which Blaine, did I get it right? Economic Sustainability Task Force, which Blaine has been chairing, which has a separate report that has more to do specifically with kind of long-range financial planning. And that is, as I just heard said, is going to be certainly part of the consideration as we think about a 3-year or longer financial plan to begin to change what is, as was pointed out, a really structural deficit that we've been facing for years and years. So that's very important to have, particularly as we think about how much
deficit spending we're even considering to take on this year, it has to be within I think the feeling is that it has to be contextualized within, well then, if we do that this year, how are we going to get out of trouble going forward? And so that's the nature of that endeavor going forward. But so that's the two different kinds of planning activities that have been going on, and what's been mostly used for budgeting has to do with the task force work.
Thank you. And as I'm walking back to you, Bonnie, I will first say thank you so much, Tony. So part of what we did and why we did the Economic Sustainability Task Force, hi, I'll speak directly into the camera, is that when we looked at the North Star goals that we came up with, which were, and we said, wow, this is really what we feel called to live into. And it is becoming beloved community. It is increasing our capacity to be active in the world. It is providing a sense of belonging and sanctuary here at All Saints Church. We wanted to say, well, what resources do we have to actualize these? We didn't want to all of a sudden do strategic planning that required either this much resources and then realize we have this much, or on the other side, that required this much resource and we realized we had this much. And so we called together, and again, thanks to Blaine Kavanaugh for chairing this, we called together what we called the Economic Sustainability Task Force. And what that group has done and is continuing to do is to say, can we develop a 3-year plan, say, to say how are we going to be economically sustainable? And it really is about dealing with these structural deficits. And a structural deficit is like, it's sort of here every year. And as the slide says, or the previous slide said, we have a $300,000 to $500,000 structural deficit. So, Sally, did you have something else on this point before? Because Bonnie's got one more thing. Great,
Thank
go.
you. I just wanted to say, Bonnie, we are, in fact, using those North Star goals. And I'm doing it from memory, so Tony or Terry, correct me but belonging, activism, communication, kind of and sanctuary. But we are using that in terms of how we structure and think about organizing staff. And those goals will be part of, for the first time, we will have a formal accountability system. There's been accountability systems, but not a formalized one ever in the church. So those goals are actually being used to organize staff and organize staff activities, and will be integrated into goals that staff will need to respond to dream about and respond to and be accountable.
Thank you so much, all of you. That really was very informative, and I appreciate it. The last one's really quick, and that is a timeline for when the 2024 budget is expected to be adopted, and when will we see that?
We are scheduled to have our next one of these in May. Not sure the date. I think Mike might be looking for it. It would be nice if we have an approved budget before annual meeting.
We will. Or before annual meeting, I see.
Yeah,
We'll
so
definitely
maybe
have it
not
before May.
Maybe not before annual meeting, but we will have one for May. So we'll be, with all likelihood, focusing on the budget and really unpacking that for everybody at the May town hall.
Yeah, and so really what we have is some really faithful groups doing a lot of good due diligence, and that's the Finance Committee and the Vestry. The Finance Committee has not forwarded a budget to the Vestry yet, but we've been keeping the Vestry updated on what's going on. And the Finance Committee is very rightly concerned with, what are we going to do with the structural deficit? And especially over the next 3 or 4 years, specifically, what are we going to do to get out of this? And so what we're doing is we're working with the Finance Committee on strategic refinements to really sort of a 3-year plan to really put some meat on the bones of, okay, how are we going to get from here to there? And so, Tim, is there anything more that you'd like to add on that as Finance Chair?
Thank you, and again, thank you for all your input and questions. And we have so many good people, working on this. As Mike mentioned, the Finance Committee has not endorsed a budget. The Finance Committee doesn't approve a budget; they recommend or don't recommend a budget to vestry, vestry then making the decisions to make sure that it's consistent with our goals and so forth. One of the pushbacks, if you want to call it that, in any budget, if anyone here has been involved in any budgeting, even at the household level, there's a lot of push and pull, right? What do you want? What do I get? One of our goals on the finance committee right now is finally that we're out of the weeds, thanks to Aaron and Karen and everybody. We understand exactly-ish, right, where we are. Lonnie's going to tell us we still need more, because we do, right? That's part of our goal. As we push back a little bit on the budget, we understand that we have a negative budget, or it's a deficit budget. As we then go forward, the question is, with Blaine's help and that committee, the sustainability, and Tony Jackson's been so helpful here, and so many others, is if we spend $1,000, what do we get? If we spend $200,000, what do we get? We already know we need another $300,000 to $500,000 a year to continue operating in a meaningful way. And so the gentleman that mentioned the endowment, your name again, I'm sorry? Because we got to sign him up for the endowment. The gentleman that you talked about, the endowment. Jim White, thank you. That's probably the hardest thing to sell. It's kind of like inviting you over so you can look at my septic tank in my house. It's really exciting, so necessary, right? But yeah, exactly. And that's all rolling downhill. And if there's a pump down below that pumps it up to the septic tank, it's really exciting. But that is where then that ask comes. So from a production perspective or from a fundraising perspective, right? If the endowment is at $10 million, simple interest calculations are driving a number. So for every $1 million, we're driving 40,000, right, conservatively on earnings, and we have less than $1 million. If we need 3 million, 5 million, 10 million, whatever it is, that's to help backfill what we are generating from an operating perspectives. Now, I always act or move, or our committee at least, we're directing traffic and understanding that where we are, we believe in our mission. We have our 4 pillars here, we have our mission, we have our leadership, we have our North Star goals. Presuming that's where we want to be, how do we cover, right? What do we need to cover? And that's our goal in the finance committee. So it's not just, oh no, we should spend less here, we're going to cut our way out of this thing. I don't believe that's going to happen. And that's where that sustainability committee is doing so much good work, so that when we do the big ask, we need X, and here's why. Here's what we get, and here's what will take us into the next decade and the next 2 decades. And that's a hard sell, and we're hoping to earn your confidence in this process. That's why we're agonizing over this, because I know we believe in the mission, or we wouldn't be in this room. So we're the easy sell here, right? Presumably. But then going forward, how do we cover this nut specifically? And so when you see it and you know it, and then hold us accountable, then we can feel good about whatever that is. If we're wrong, because the attendance is declining, something's variated, whatever it is, doesn't matter. Then we could change directions, right? It's change of pace, change of direction. What's next? And that's why that 1-year plan, plug the holes, 3-year plan, then start developing and laying out that foundation for our future, and then raising additional funds for that sustainability. So I just wanted to at least share that with you all, because it's a lot of agony in this process. It's bumpy, to say the least, but we're feeling good about at least, working through this issue and working through these issues together. So I just wanted to share that with you then as we go forward. So thank you.
Thank you, Tim. And so for those that say, Monique said she asked the endowment, it's always a woman who asks the hard questions. So amen, and around here usually answers them too. So just a couple other things to add, and then we have time for 1 or 2 more questions, and I do want to sort of honor time here, is that there's also things that we're looking at over even the longer term. And how do we, where are we going to be 5 years from now, 10 years from now? One of the realities of our situation is that, so what percentage of our budget is personnel?
75%
so
of 2023.
75% of our budget is personnel. And then also in a non-COVID year, about 85 to 90% of our income comes from pledge giving. I'm looking at you and I'm getting the nod, yes, from that. And again, the big piece of that is the lack of endowment that we have. And that means that, that's volatile. That means that we don't have a lot of margin if we have issues with giving. And it's why all of our giving is so incredibly important. And part of what we're working on, and again, it's not going to be a 1 year or a 3 year fix, is what is the appropriate, healthy level, percentage of a congregation budget that should come from giving. And then how much should be endowment, how much should be building use and other income and other things like that. And so that's, again, we want to make sure that we're moving towards that optimum. We're not taking a step backwards, so we're considering those things now, but that's a longer term thing. And then I want to call out the work, Sally, that you're doing, and another person you should know, even though she's not here, is Samantha Kramer, who is our human resources specialist, is really saying, how do we structure the staff so that we can continue to thrive? Knowing that 75% of our budget is personnel, and that's part of why talking about deficit or talking about a cut is so painful, because it's talking about people we know and love who work here, and I know this is not the first time All Saints Church has had this conversation. It's also, well, how are we structured? And are we structured in a way where we have the right staff and the staff is helping us thrive in the right ways? And Sally, that's what you and your team and that we've been working on. And so, all of these, and it's sort of, well, where do all of these things come together? And again, deeply grateful. We have a vestry personnel committee, and I want to especially shout out Trula Worthy-Clayton and Chris Foltz. Am I missing anyone else to shout out there right now? I don't know. And again, that's really amazing work that this group is doing. Anything else? Yes, here, and then, we got Mark and then David again. Yeah.
So I don't know the insides of the vestry. I don't know the insides of what's going on or whatever, but to me, it still seems like we're missing the point. The point is that our church is in a state of decline right now. We've lost a lot of families. So to me, the question needs to be, how do we do outreach? I mean, do we have an outreach committee that is trying to figure out ways to market our church to the greater Pasadena area? The second thing is, I have some ideas, and I know we're running in deficits, but it's going to cost money to do this. But the big people who brought in lots of people, and some of them stayed and became members, was having guest speakers come in who were powerful. I'm talking about Jane Goodall. I'm talking about Bishop Tutu. I'm talking about Carnell West. I'm talking about, JPL. We had some scientists come in. It brings people who don't go to church into the conversation, and that if we get 3 or 4 member homes from that, and they're bringing in the money too, that's a way to grow. The second thing, I don't know, because I haven't been I know there's a committee for the centennial, the 100. Have you thought about a huge fundraiser, a huge fundraising dinner for the centennial, where we invite political leaders of the city and so forth to celebrate this huge milestone and raise some good funds, and maybe even get some new families? That's what I think we kind of missed, in my point of view. We just kind of missed that. How do we do the outreach? How do we get people in?
Thank you. David.
I'm so glad that the question of endowment was raised, but we've got to look at what real endowment is versus what expenses are. If we're looking at building maintenance and facilities, that's a predictable expense, at least roughly, and we need to also budget for unanticipated events. If we don't do that, then we are deferring those expenses and saddling future populations, future membership with those expenses, and where we're projecting a declining number of families that are contributing, that's an irresponsible position to defer those. And we're saying, oh, we'll depend on major contributors to solve the problem we've created for ourselves and take care of repairs. If we do that, then those contributions that could have gone to producing an endowment are now being eaten up by our failure to cover expenses as we go along. So that's a dramatically difficult situation. Real endowment, if we have contributions that we say, well, they might be used for general funds, but I understand you contributed for endowment, again, is we need to have some way of at least institutionally securing our budget for the future. The Pharaoh said, what's this dream about 7 fat cows and 7 lean cows all about? And Joseph said, well, you're going to have times in the future where the income isn't what you expected. And so we need to plan on that occurrence. So that's even beyond budgeting for what is real and what we can anticipate. It says we need to plan on the unanticipated. And even more than looking at contributions for parishioners to establish and grow an endowment, we need to budget ourselves. We have to tithe within the parish so that we set aside funds year after year after year to begin to grow a reserve that will cover not only extraordinary and unanticipated events and shrinking contributors, but build up something that will sustain this church and the good work it does. Nobody wants to talk about reducing program, but we need to have a balance between what we have coming in and program, and even make a contribution so that we are funding our own endowment so that in the future we are healthier and healthier.
David, I'm going to build a time machine and send you back 50 years and have you talk to the vestry of All Saints Church. So, Blaine, and then I'm going to let y'all go.
So you've heard that I'm the chair of the Economic Sustainability Task Force. A couple of points. As we met, we early on faced a choice of how do we deal with some of our financial challenges? Do we make massive cuts? And you've heard that the overwhelming majority of our budget is personnel, so that would reflect people. Do we try to struggle and slowly see if we can survive without huge cuts, but some cuts? Or do we invest? The conclusion, the unanimous conclusion of our committee was the only way to bring us back to where we want to be was to invest. We also understood that that kind of investment, at least in the short term, was going to drive some sort of deficit. The question that we faced, and the question that the Finance Committee and the vestry faces, is how much deficit are we willing to accept in the short term to turn things around, bring people back, however we want to phrase it. And many of you, I think, already understand this, but we don't know exactly what we're going to get in giving this year. We can have conservative estimates, we can have optimistic estimates, but with a deficit with moderate, reasonable estimates of $300,000 to $500,000, estimates of giving, we need to be careful that we don't get too optimistic somewhere or too conservative somewhere. How do we balance what we have coming in with what we think we might also get, what we might hope to get, with what we feel we need to spend to be the place we want to be a part of? So those are the hard choices that we're facing. How much risk do we want to take in terms of deficit? How much reserves do we want to commit? And how good a estimate can we make of the funds that are going to come in? Because if you've seen from the charts, we never get exactly what we think we're going to get. So what is it going to be?
Thank you. And then just really one more quickly. I want to make sure people have a chance to get home.
I'm John. So in your point about investing, what can we invest in where there's, you mentioned earlier, cost versus benefit? And what can we do not over a year or two or three, but next week? or like the number one recruiting season for new members is Easter and Christmas. So do we put together a program to go out to Pasadena, Facebook advertising, to bring members to that service? Do we make a video, short video, send it out by social media to get people in? Do we employ somebody like Outreach Inc., which does it for thousands of churches around the country? I think we would need to get reduced staff. If we did something that had a very high productivity for the cost and do that tomorrow, we don't have time to wait maybe a year to do this, or 2 years, then Christmas, or recruiting people to come homecoming back to church after the summer. I did this at my church in Weston, Massachusetts with Outreach, and I just discovered them, but they do this kind of thing. There are probably other organizations, but it would preserve our staff. But we're spending this kind of money, and it's not necessarily reaching the kind of people that we could reach with a small investment. And what should we spend on advertising the church? 1% of revenue? 3%? How can a company survive if they don't spend 5 or 10% of revenue on advertising or evangelism? So I think we should do something like that.
Would you be interested in joining the beloved community, the congregational development team, and working on that? I'm dead serious. You've got experience in that. We'd love to have you working on that with us. Okay, great. So just a couple things on that. First of all, we've identified things that we need to invest in. One of the things is we've always had a thriving children, youth, and families program here, and we need to continue to invest in that. We need to invest in communications, both how we communicate within the community and how we get our message out in the community. And we need to invest in pastoral care. And how are we equipping ourselves to care for each other? And those are the things that we're finding that people are really, really hungry for. And as an added bonus, it's also the gospel to do all of those things. And so I want to, first of all, just say thank you to our presenters, particularly to Aaron and Sarah, but also to some people like Sally, who's worked behind the scenes. Karen, again, thank you for all your work. Our wardens, Risa and Kathy, work so hard. And then the members of if you're on the finance committee, could you raise your hand? Got some great members of the finance committee here. And I want to leave us just with, so we're walking out of here, we'll say, well, what can I do? And I've got some ideas. First of all, if there's something you're interested in, come see us and we'll put you on a team working on it, which I really appreciate. The first thing is, if you have pledged, thank you so much. If you haven't pledged, please do that right now. And I always just ask you to do 3 things, which is to say your prayers, and for me, saying my prayers is mostly listening. To have conversations, if there's people in your life that you make financial decisions with, have those conversations, and then pledge whatever God puts on your heart. And so please do that. If you've already done that, maybe go back to God and say, God, maybe you were asking me to give a little more than this, and see if there's some more that you can give, either in a special gift or a pledge this year. So please do that. Ask your friends here. Have you pledged? And encourage them to pledge if they haven't. And if they're sort of like, oh, I don't know about that, ask them to, come talk to me, Sally, Chase, Alfredo, Sarah, any of us. We'll talk with you, we'll pray with you about that. Another thing to do is really consider your estate planning. And have you remembered All Saints Church in your estate planning? And if you haven't, let's talk about that, and we can let you know how to do that, and that's incredibly important. And think about, do I want this to be an unrestricted gift, or do I want this to be something that there's something I really, really care about that I want to make sure is still here or is a part of All Saints Church in the future. 2 more things. The first is, and I'm a big believer in advertising and getting your name out there and doing all that stuff, and the number one way that any organization or community grows is through personal invitation. And frankly, the distance between first and second place ain't even close. And so there were Lenten pew cards in the pews this morning. I always say take 3, one for you at home, one to give to someone to specifically say, hey, I'm coming to this thing at All Saints Church. Will you come with me? You've heard me say this before. You have no control over what people's response will be. You have every control over making the invitation, but 100% of the people who are not invited don't show up. And so just put that out there. If you're excited about what's happening here at All Saints Church, invite someone to come with you. Doesn't even need to be on a Sunday morning. Sunday morning can be a really scary time to come to church for some people. It's like, oh my gosh, it's a big church. I like sleeping in on Sunday morning. We're serving pancakes Tuesday night. Bring them for some pancakes. It's a really sort of nice way to come in and meet the community. But always be thinking about who can I bring into this community? Who can I invite to be part of this Lenten group with me? Who can I bring on Easter Sunday morning? We're doing a lot of work right now, and I want to shout out Alfredo and Thomas Diaz and Nancy Necker and so many other people. Like many churches, we had a huge front door, but also an equally large back door. So we would get lots of people coming into church, and they would say, wow, this place is wonderful. But then we were really challenged, and this is a common issue with connecting people. And so we are, like, literally the people who filled out welcome cards today, before they go to bed tonight, they will have gotten a contact from All Saints Church. And an invitation to getting connected. And we're tracking people now in ways that we haven't done before. And so part of, that's the other thing is, and the other thing is when you're on the lawn on Sunday morning and you see someone you don't know, go up and say hi. And they may have been here for 50 years, the same as you. But if you don't know them, just go up and say hi. Hey, what brought you to All Saints Church this morning? Sometimes, and this is just a human thing, we're all so excited to see the people that we know, and Sunday morning is the one time we do it. And then new people just kind of end up standing off by themselves. And so we can all be part of being that welcoming community. And we are that in our hearts, just sometimes it takes a little nudge of intentionality. And then the last one, and it's the most important one, which is pray. And I'm not someone who believes that sort of God is up there and she's waiting for us like, okay, we've gotten 499 prayers. When we get to 500, I'm going to do something. I find what prayer does for me is prayer changes my heart. And so please pray for each other as a church community. Pray for your leadership in this church. Pray for this church as a whole. As I said, for me, prayer involves a lot of listening. But continue to hold, please, pray for your wardens, Risa and Kathy, every day. And the most common prayer I pray is, God, love these people through me. And as we do that, God's going to surprise us and challenge us. And we're going to find new ways to love each other. And that's what makes a church community thrive, is when we find new and wonderful ways to love each other. So the next financial town hall meeting is going to be on June 2nd. But in between that, we have an annual meeting on March 10th. If we do not have a budget ready for March 10th, we will schedule a time before June 2nd to present the budget to the congregation. And again, just want to thank everyone and thank you all for coming. So, afternoon.